Yeah. Should we go? Okay, everyone. Let me just see if we're recording. Don, all good? Awesome. Thank you for being here at the Free Market Foundation here at the beautiful Northwoods House. I am Martin van Staden. I'm the head of policy here. And we haven't had one of these evening events in a while, so we decided to treat you all to a chilly get-together here on Parktown Ridge. Yes, yeah. Hope everyone is dressed warm. So we are very grateful for this turnout. It's great to fill this room. And we're also very grateful for everyone joining us online. So welcome. So tonight is a special occasion as the Free Market Foundation is relaunching the Free Speech Union of South Africa. So free expression has long been a principle and a very important value to us at the FMF as classical liberals and as libertarians. But given the turning global and really South African as well sentiment regarding expression, we thought it's maybe time to start doubling down. And up to now, the Free Speech Union of South Africa has been driven by the steady hand of Sarah Gon, who joins us here tonight. And I remember years ago being asked by Sarah to serve on the advisory board of the Free Speech Union of South Africa, and I see some faces here, I think, who also answered the call of duty. But we thank you, Sarah, for your years of hard work, taking a principled stand for free expression in one of the countries where it's probably quite difficult to do that consistently. So before I introduce my panelists, just a little bit of housekeeping. We are going to do the formal proceedings now, which will include a panel discussion, and that will be followed by Q&A. And then we will conclude, but there will still be some fresh refreshments outside, and we invite you to please stick around for that and mingle. So I will ask you all now, please, to mute your cell phones if you haven't done so already, just so we can keep things going smoothly. So, great. I am very honored to be joined by Advocate Mark Oppenheimer. He is of the Johannesburg Bar, for his sins. And, exactly. And he is, of course, the incoming executive director of the Free Speech Union of South Africa. And so the FMF really has been in the thick of free expression advocacy for a while now. So together, under Mark's leadership, the four of us hope to get the ball rolling on the FSU, and if we're lucky, but only if we're lucky, move the needle in South Africa back in the direction of greater tolerance for robust, very often offensive, but always free speech. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome David and Sarah to the stage.
Thank you, Dr. van Staden. That has a nice ring to it. I was very fortunate to recently attend Martin's graduation ceremony. And so the Free Speech Union is very lucky to have a constitutional scholar and one of the leading advocates for free expression, and somebody who's, in the form of Mark Oppenheimer, has really influenced jurisprudence in South Africa around free speech and hate speech. If you open any law textbook in the relevant module, you'll see many of Mark's cases cited. So it is my pleasure to welcome you on this cold winter's night to Northwoods House, the home of the Free Market Foundation. And here on the ridge in Parktown, the flame of freedom burns bright like a beacon of light for all to see. Tonight, we will be discussing one of the most important civil and political rights of all, freedom of speech. Your ability to exchange ideas, to debate and to remonstrate, to challenge power, to poke fun, and to articulate an alternative vision for society. All of this rests on your ability to express yourself without hindrance by the state or your fellow citizens. Free speech matters for everyone. It is a foundational right without which other rights cannot exist. Freedom of speech requires tolerance for a diversity of views and the ability to dissent. The media, which we rely on to understand the world around us, can neither be independent nor truthful without vigorous protections for free speech. Academic inquiry is hindered when scholars fear the repercussions of their research or saying something controversial in a lecture. Freedom of association rests on free speech. If you cannot speak freely, you cannot organize politically. You cannot oppose those in power or kick the rascals out without resorting to force. Freedom begins with free speech. It is the bedrock of a free society. What is the Free Speech Union? The FSU was founded in February 2020 by Toby Young, a prominent British journalist and civil society activist. He did so in response to growing government restrictions on speech in the United Kingdom, which has seen a dramatic rise in prosecutions for so-called speech code violations. It is not uncommon for ordinary Brits to receive a knock on the door by a policeman after being reported for a so-called non-crime hate incident. Unfortunately, threats to freedom of speech are not confined to the United Kingdom. This is a global phenomenon. Following the success of the FSU UK, several free speech unions were founded in other parts of the world under the umbrella of the FSU International. In fact, South Africa was one of the first jurisdictions to open a local FSU chapter. We owe a huge debt of gratitude to Sarah Gon, who we are delighted to have here with us tonight in the front row. Sarah founded the FSU South Africa in June 2022 when she was still working full-time at the Institute of Race Relations. Late last year, Sarah voluntarily stepped down after accepting my proposal for the FSU South Africa to be transferred to the Free Market Foundation. I want to thank Sarah here publicly, as well as the IRR and the members of the original Board of Advisors for catalyzing this important initiative, for which we feel a very special duty of care, and we wish Sarah well with her future endeavors. Thank you, Sarah. The various chapters of the FSU International operate in different ways. In the United Kingdom, the FSU advocates broadly for free expression, but also operates as a legal insurer. Like a trade union, members pay their dues and are supported by the FSU when their speech rights or even their livelihoods are threatened. If you are a journalist, a comedian, an artist, or an intellectual who has fallen foul of the mob or the nanny state, the FSU can come to your aid and defend you in court. Here in South Africa, we enjoy a robust culture of free speech that has withstood various forms of censorship both during and after apartheid. South Africans have a healthy irreverence towards authority and an argumentative spirit which lends itself to free expression. Sadly, however, South Africa has lately experienced a narrowing of the window for free speech. Consider a few recent cases. In March 2025, comedian and influencer Anton Taylor posted a clearly satirical video to TikTok in which he pretended to be a criminal who had bribed suspended police minister Senzo Mchunu with, quote, a BMW and 3 prostitutes. Soon thereafter, Mr. Taylor's Cape Town home was raided by the Hawks. In news reports at the time, Mr. Taylor alleged that Hawks captain Solomon Moloto specifically told him that he had been charged because, quote, I had insulted the police minister and he couldn't let that slide. Mr. Taylor noticed the letters CATS printed before the case number of the minister's criminal complaint. Crimes against the state. Fortunately for Mr. Taylor, the National Prosecuting Authority declined to prosecute under the Cyber Crimes Act, citing a lack of reasonable prospects of successful prosecution. Mr. Sithobi Nene was not so fortunate. It was almost a year ago to the week that the Pietermaritzburg Regional Court sentenced Mr. Nene, a then 36-year-old man from KwaZulu-Natal, to 5 years direct imprisonment after he pleaded guilty to cyber forgery, cyber uttering, and disclosing intimate data images. Mr. Nene's crime? Downloading digital images of President Cyril Ramaphosa, former Police Minister Bheki Cele, and former National Police Commissioner Kehla Sitole, amongst others, and superimposing their faces onto pornography and distributing it. It seems South African police ministers do not take kindly to being ridiculed. They are more than happy to send their goons to intimidate others. Another case. In December 2025, there was an attempt to prevent popular musician David Scott, also known as the Kiffness, from performing at a concert in Kirstenbosch Botanical Gardens, a state-owned premises, due to his strong views on the conflict in the Middle East. The FSU South Africa worked behind the scenes to lobby the concert organizers to resist calls to cancel their agreement with Mr. Scott. Fortunately, the show went ahead as planned, with a handful of protesters exercising their free speech rights on the lawns outside the venue. At the University of Cape Town, the council of the university passed a boycott in 2024, prohibiting UCT academics from collaborating with Israeli scholars. Professor Adam Mendelsohn, a historian at UCT, has taken the university to court, arguing that the so-called Gaza motion is an unreasonable infringement on his academic freedom. I should add that Mark Oppenheimer and I both serve on the UCT Council, and we have each steadfastly refused to abide by this, or we have opposed this motion for similar reasons as Professor Mendelsohn. And I should also add that our views expressed here tonight do not represent those of the university. Civil rights groups Solidarity and AfriForum, some of whose leadership are here this evening, were recently investigated for high treason after campaigning in Washington, D.C. for recognition of the scourge of farm attacks and race-based laws. Earlier this month, Mark Saltzman, a member of the family which founded the retail group Dis-Chem, apparently called journalist Redi Klabi a bitch in a heated exchange on social media. Not a very nice thing to say, but certainly not worthy of the subsequent investigation launched by the Human Rights Commission. In many of the above examples, people have said things that might be uncouth, uncomfortable, or even untrue, but that does not justify limiting their free speech rights. I want to say a brief word about hate speech. In South Africa today, there is a pattern of organs of state targeting private citizens for speech violations and making an example of them while ignoring genuine hate speech uttered by powerful politicians like Julius Malema. You may recall that the Constitutional Court simply declined to hear the case brought against Malema by AfriForum in the Kill the Boer matter. The FSU South Africa is not a free speech absolutist organization. We recognize that there may be instances in which expression cannot enjoy legal protection, primarily incitements to violence. Sometimes, however, false allegations of hate speech are used to suppress speech that is perfectly lawful. Our concern is to push back against the double standards which are evident in our law. The FSU's work will be narrowly focused on upholding and defending free expression against threats of censorship or other forms of state sanction. The FSU South Africa will not advocate for any underlying cause or a particular social or political grouping. While our work will initially focus on advocacy, we will be on the lookout for litigation opportunities, either as a friend of the court or through direct applications. Such litigation will be dependent on external funding and an alignment with the FSU's core objectives. While the Free Market Foundation remains ideologically committed to free enterprise and limited constitutional government, it will fight these battles with the other weapons in its arsenal. However, as a member of South Africa's rich and diverse civil society, we also know that the FMF's broader work will be impossible without free speech. This is why we have adopted the FSU as an initiative of the FMF. I invite you to join our campaign to preserve the greatest freedom of all, your right to speak. Thank you. I'm going to momentarily take over the emceeing duties to showcase these messages from FSU international chapters from around the world. And what will follow is a video statement from FSU UK, FSU Brazil, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand.
Hi there, I'm at Heathrow, about to go on my flight to Belfast for the FSU UK Northern Ireland Roadshow. But I just wanted to send a quick message of congratulations to the FSU of South Africa on its relaunch, and I hope it's as successful as I expect it to be, and also a shout out to Sarah Gon for getting the ball rolling. Anyway, good luck. Hope it all goes well today. Cheers.
Greetings, friends from South Africa. I'm delighted to hear that you're about to start your own free speech union. I'm Eli Vieira. I'm the president of Free Speech Union Brazil. As fellow citizens of developing nations, we understand very well the dangers of watching silently as free speech declines. I'll give you one example from Brazil. Since 2019, judges at the Federal Supreme Court had been violating our main internet law to ban profiles on social media. Incidentally, in this law, it was Article 19 that guaranteed free speech online, just like Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Last year, this court declared this article partially unconstitutional. Now, President Lula da Silva has issued 2 executive orders that take advantage of this legal gap opened by the court for censorship 5 months before national elections. This is just one example of many. We have even seen people imprisoned for their political opinions in 2023. To us, Brazilians and South Africans alike, I'm sure, the decline of free speech is the canary in the mine that indicates that the rule of law is also at stake and democracy endangered. I hope that together we can reverse this trend. Welcome and good luck.
I'm Lisa Bildy. I'm the Executive Director of the Free Speech Union of Canada, and I want to extend our warmest wishes and congratulations to our colleagues in South Africa on your launch of the new and improved Free Speech Union in South Africa. We're going to share a lot of common battles, I'm sure, and I look forward to working with you on those. But we also have unique challenges within our own countries. For Canada, I think it's the fact that we have this long border with the US. And over time, we've come to identify ourselves kind of in opposition to the US. So while they are perceived as this country that's, with messy freedom and cowboy ethos, and have this robust protection of freedom of expression in their First Amendment, we have to do things differently here. So for us, our priorities are peace, order, and good government, which is very different from freedom. And we do not have a robust protection of free speech. We have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which ostensibly protects freedom of expression, but it comes with a limiting clause that says, well, you can have freedom of expression, but it might be it can be limited if it's demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. So there's lots of subjective wiggle words there. And as you might expect, over time, our jurisprudence has focused more on the limits to free speech rather than supporting the purpose of it and the benefits of it to a robust democracy. So those are unique challenges for Canada, but we've managed to incorporate the Americans' culture war into our society in all respects. We just don't have the tools to fight it off quite the way that they do. And that's shown in, for example, a lot of our professional regulators, school boards, and municipal councils, and pretty much all of our institutions, universities, human rights tribunals. They all seem to operate with this idea now that speech is a bad thing, and that we need to be able to protect people from words they don't like, that they find offensive, that hurt their feelings, that they disagree with, that make them think. So it really is we're in a bad way, and I think we need to restore the culture of freedom and appreciating freedom of expression in this country. Because we need to be able to put pressure on politicians to do the right thing and bring in legislation. We're very busy trying to fight battles in all different corners, and we look forward to continuing to work with our friends and colleagues around the world as we fight these battles together. So, congratulations again.
I'm Ruben Kirkham, and I'm one of the directors of the Free Speech Union of Australia. I wanted to say a few words about free speech, why it matters, and what we've got going on in Australia at the minute. Free speech is more important than ever. It is the bedrock of a modern, civilised, democratic society. But most importantly, perhaps, it is about a society based on the truth. The truth matters. It means that when we go to the doctor, we know that the medical treatment that we are receiving is appropriate. It means that decisions more generally are made on evidence. The loss of respect for biological reality in some of the West is a good illustration of the problem here. More generally, the truth means that we can make a genuine decision when voting in an election. I would go to say that without it, we don't really have a liberal democratic society. Australia has an unusual free speech landscape, which we've been getting to know over the last 2 years or so. One of the things we've seen was the so-called misinformation bill, which were statements that it disagreed with removed from the internet. Thankfully, our campaign against that succeeded. We also have a so-called World First E-Safety Commission that we've been battling with considerable success, which is now in the position of being little more than a think tank, despite her aspirations to try and censor the worldwide internet from Australia. On top of that, we've also got the failed social media ban. The kids are still on the internet. This case is off to the High Court, and we'll be continuing to fight Australia's attempt at worldwide internet censorship. So that's one of our unusual free speech challenges. It is fairly, at least hopefully, unique to Australia, but we are having a few copycats we're seeing around the world, and we hope that everyone will be seeing that off too. Finally, congratulations on your launch party. I hope that one day I'll be able to visit and see FSU South Africa in action. We wish you every success from Australia. Thank you for listening.
My name is Jelaine Heather and I'm the CEO of the Free Speech Union New Zealand, and I wish to offer a very warm welcome to the Free Speech Union of South Africa. Now, the same fight is being fought across every free country at the moment. The tactics may differ, but the threat remains the same. Governments deciding what's okay for its citizens to say, professional regulators disciplining members for things they've said outside of work, universities asking job candidates to swear allegiance to political doctrines, and police taking notice of social media posts and lawful speech. This is a slow, steady narrowing of what is acceptable speech in society these days. In New Zealand, we are pushing back on professional overreach. We are defending students and academics who refuse to be silenced. We are pushing back on police overreach on lawful speech, and we are challenging apparent sweeping government censorship and communication access control under the guise of the teen social media ban. We are filing submissions and we are funding cases. Free speech is not a Western luxury. It is the engine of every democracy worth having, and is the vital operating system for every functioning and flourishing community and society. To the Free Speech Union of South Africa, welcome to the fight. We are stronger together.
Wonderful sentiments. I'm going to ask my panelists to please take their seats. I hope we're quite audible from these mics. Not yet. There we go. Perfect.
I was sitting on my mic, so hopefully you didn't hear anything rude.
Okay. Okay, so let's get started. Mark, David has covered quite a bit of ground about why the FMF is launching a free expression initiative. But some, I think, here and online would no doubt be interested in your own journey. You're very much, I think, the face of free expression in South Africa, even if you don't accept the compliment. You've went through several trials and tribulations. You're now the head of this initiative. Off the top of my head, I can think of your experience at a certain Grahamstown Arts Festival, various cases, and maybe most recently, someone alluded to it earlier, that you used a public platform for what it's meant to be, and that's to challenge power, and you're challenging racial engineering in the bar. So maybe give us a sense of your personal journey before we turn to the law.
Well, I've always been an outspoken person. The story my dad likes to tell about me is that during one of our family functions, I was about 8, I was having a debate with a judge, and he got so upset with me at some point that he stood up and he said, "You know what, Mark, you can fuck off." And that's my dad's proudest moment. So, yeah, I've sort of learned that, engaging with ideas is a very important thing. It's important to find out what's true. I have something in me that lets me speak out when I think other people are afraid to. You mentioned Grahamstown. This was about 10 years ago. probably one of the greatest things for my career was wanting to ask a question at a ThinkFest and being silenced and threatened. Actually, I think you reached out to me at the time when you were running the Rational Standards, so you should write up what happened. And then I spoke about it at the Free Market Foundation, and that led to many opportunities to get involved in litigation around free speech. As Dave mentioned, a lot of the cases that I've been involved in are now the locus classicus cases in our law on free speech and on hate speech. And there's something wonderful about being able to shape what our law looks like. And shaping the direction which provides clarity on the one hand, because we do have a legal category in South Africa of hate speech, which had been excessively understood. So hurtful speech was hate speech at one point, and I ran litigation which struck that down in the Constitutional Court in the Kulani case. So I think it's important that people are able to say things that others find uncomfortable. I think you want not only a right to free speech, but also a culture of speech and a culture of tolerance where people are going to say things that you disagree with, and that's okay. And the way to respond to it is with more speech.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And I think you alluded to the next question there, and that is that globally, increasingly, but now in South Africa with the adoption of the Hate Speech Act, and I mean, shortly thereafter, the superior courts in the Kildeburg case seemingly kind of abandoning a lot of that sentiment at the very least. So why don't you provide some guidance for the audience on what is the state of hate speech law in South Africa right now and its tension with the right to freedom of expression?
So if you look at our constitution, we have these very broad, generous free speech rights. It includes academic freedom, artistic creativity, the right to receive information and impart ideas, freedom of the press. And then we have these three limitations, which are not part of the right. So they're not prohibited, they're just not part of the right. So the one is propaganda for war. Second is the incitement of imminent violence. And then the third is the advocacy of hatred on the grounds of race, gender, ethnicity, and religion that constitutes an incitement to cause harm. So that last category is generally seen as the hate speech category. It's regulated in law by the Equality Act, and now, as you mentioned, by the Hate Speech Crimes Act, which now for the first time introduces criminal sanctions. So you can be jailed for speech, although there are other laws which allow people to be jailed in South Africa, which aren't spoken about very often. For a long time, you had this clause which made hurtful speech hate speech, and that's how courts had sort of interpreted, and that's where the penny sparrow sort of conviction comes from. I then ran a case which struck that down, as I say. So we have legal clarity in the sense of we know what the abstract principles are, which is very much in line with the Constitution, barring an additional thing from the Constitutional Court, which is that you always have to have the propagation of hatred against one of the groups. But if the words themselves amount to a harm, then it also amounts to hate speech as opposed to mere incitement. It's very unclear what that means. What we're finding is that in the application of those principles, the double standards are very evident. So if you call for an ethnic group to be murdered, and you do it in a stadium with 90,000 people chanting, and you are miming guns under conditions where members of that group are being slaughtered in disproportionate numbers, depends on the group, apparently, whether it's protected speech or not. So that's a concern and something that the Rule of Law Project played a role in pushing back on. And I think public sentiment is gigantically against these sorts of double standards. And I think that's an important thing to keep an eye on.
David, anything to add on this question of hate speech? You alluded to it a little bit in your speech, but I think specifically maybe take a different angle on we as the FMF have various connections throughout the African continent, and we've, as you said, we've had a robust culture of free speech here, but that seems almost exceptional on the African continent. And what we hear from our colleagues from places like the Gambia, Uganda, Nigeria, actually sends chills down our bones, and we don't want that for South Africa. So maybe any insights on that?
No, absolutely. And what Mark said about the double standard with the way in which hate speech is being applied, I think is very important to resist. And it's often weaponized against disfavored groups or political opponents, and we must be very vigilant against that. Just on your question about the link between free speech and civil society, I think something that's very striking for us as an African liberal NGO, we often attend events in other African jurisdictions. And we hear tales of woe from some of our partner organizations in these countries of harassment, intimidation, being jailed for just speaking out against government authority. And that really just throws sand in the gears of the work that these important organizations do. And I always return to South Africa being very realistic about the threats and the challenges here, but also grateful for that robust culture of free speech that we have in this country. And that's something to be very jealously guarded.
Yeah, I mean, I can add on how petty it gets. There was, I think last year or the year before, there were very robust protests against a new tax in Kenya. People died for protesting and that. People were imprisoned. One of our good colleagues in Uganda recently had to go into hiding because he opposed the, I don't know, how many times their constitution has been amended now to extend the president, who's a guy who's been there since the 1970s, to extend his term. Our colleague there had to go into hiding. Luckily, he's safe. And these are the things that are actually quite normal in Africa. When we speak to our colleagues from those countries, they don't say it in the sense of, wow, this is an exceptional intrusion on our rights. It's perfectly normal. And we risk having the same thing in South Africa. And that gives rise to my final question before we, David, please add on that.
Yeah, I just was sitting here watching those videos from the developed Western world, which is supposedly the birthplace of the free speech tradition. And it's very notable that in countries like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, part of the kind of broader Anglosphere, that we're seeing this backsliding. And it's all in the name of preserving good relations between people, threats to the state or to public order, whatever the case may be, or protecting the fragility, the emotions of people who might not like what you're saying. But then very quickly it kind of metastasizes into a broader clampdown on free speech. And I think that that's very worrying. And we should learn from not only our African partners, but also our partners in the West.
No, that's an excellent point, because I think for the longest time, we in South Africa assumed that we'll always be able to look at the shining beacons on the hill, the UK with her Keir Starmer and these kind of fascists now who have almost on a dime turned free speech there very much against what it's supposed to be. And I think in light of that, my final question is that we have various threats to freedom of expression coming our way in South Africa right now. In my view, one of the worst ones is the Hate Speech Act now. It's already law, but now there's going to be litigation about that. But my question to both of you, and Mark, let's start with you, and then be as specific as you think you possibly can be, and then you as well, David, after Mark. What is the thing that you're looking at coming down the line? What is the biggest threat that, and then we can do both policy threats, and that's going to be the Free Speech Union's core concern, policy threats. But I think also increasingly in the West, there's also, as you mentioned, this idea of a culture of free speech. Is there a way? And then I think something that people often miss, it's not just, well, society has kind of turned against speech and that's okay because society is an organic, spontaneous thing. No, I think politicians use social pressures to get what they want in the end rather than policy. So that's also something to keep an eye out. So maybe your greatest policy threat and your greatest maybe social threat, and then same question to you and Marcus then, David.
So it's an interesting feature about South Africa is that we still have a participatory democracy. So that hate speech act started in 2016. And so, you'd put in submissions, I'd put in submissions. The original versions of that legislation were absolutely horrifying. They were almost as bad as the ones you have in Europe. And so, saying things that were derogatory or insulting or ridiculing people on the grounds their profession was a crime. So if you made fun of politicians, that could have landed you in jail. Turns out the politicians of South Africa found another way to incarcerate people, as David mentioned earlier. By the way, I'm sure that's the first time anyone in this room has heard about that case. It's horrifying that the man is in jail for 5 years for basically doing what Brett Murray did in 2008 with the spear, making fun of Zuma. And the press seemed to think there was nothing wrong with incarcerating this poor guy. I think there is always the danger that when you start to say unpopular things, that you will be threatened by the state. And you see this with AfriForum and Solidarity, two of the really massive, important civil rights organizations in South Africa, going abroad, having conversations with the foreign government, pointing out some of the difficulties we have in South Africa, and then being threatened with incarceration for treason. Now, some of you will remember that treason in South Africa carried the death penalty. The Constitutional Court, in its judgment abolishing the death penalty, has a carve-out clause that says in a situation of war, treason could be met with a death penalty. So, that gives you the idea of the threat for basically saying, here's what's happening in the country, and this mass sort of denunciation of misinformation, disinformation, without any fact-checking actually going on. So you have this worry. So I think what's important as well is that people have become increasingly fragile and increasingly sort of split up into different groups where they feel very uncomfortable hearing the other side's voice. And David mentioned earlier that free speech organizations that are worth their salt care about the abstract value of free speech, which means that you're going to end up acting for people who are saying things that you personally disagree with. I would feel incredibly proud if we act for a number of people who would fundamentally disagree with each other, who would be really offended by the things that the other clients of the FSU have said. Then we're doing our job correctly. And I think it's important that we work out what the parameters are of speech. As we said, it's not an absolutist organization. There are clearly some forms of speech, it's an incitement of violence. When you're calling for people to be murdered, that speech is legitimately prohibited. But there's all sorts of other speech that is, you might not like it, but we need to protect it.
Yeah, so I'm generally a techno-optimist, but I do think that social media and other digital technologies have kind of amplified some of these threats actually to free speech in the same way as it's created opportunity for people to express themselves. And there's this theorist, René Girard, who talks about mimetic theory and the need for people to scapegoat others. And we mentioned Solidarity and AfriForum. I mean, there's no shortage of problems in South Africa, most of them caused by a very interfering socialist, African nationalist state that interferes with the rights and economic relations of its citizens. And yet, here you have a group going overseas trying to raise awareness for genuine problems. Very bad things are happening in South Africa, they say. And then they're scapegoated for that. So I think the legislative threats, the kind of codified threats to free speech are very worrying and important, but I think more worrying is the erosion of the culture of free expression. And I think the FSU, we might not be able to take on every case, but I think we are putting a flag in the sand to say, actually free speech matters. It's not something to be taken for granted. It is inalienable as a right that you have as an individual, but it can very easily be taken away by a very officious state, some busybody bureaucrats who want to govern how you speak. And so I think this is a call to arms to say, actually, if you care about free speech, you've got to back this cause and also come to the defense of people whose free speech rights are being violated, else you could be next.
Absolutely. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I just got the ball rolling. It's going to be over to you now. There is a mic in the back, I believe. I'm not sure who our runner is. Charles, if you could maybe help us out with that.
And if we can ask people to introduce themselves when they...
Yes, and please hold the mic close to your mouth. Terry, you first. And please keep it as brief as you possibly can, everyone.
It seems to me that every country other than America has got an uphill battle. I mean, America, as you know, I think it's the second one, says the government can pass no legislation against free speech. Every other country is having to protect free speech where legislation can be passed against it. Are you optimistic that we will win that battle? I mean, it's a very different war. In America, they don't have this sort of fight going on. But every other country that you refer to, all the Western countries, still have the same problem because they don't have a constitution that protects freedom of speech.
Well, we do have a constitution that protects free speech. It's not as robust as the American Constitution. So they have no legal concept of hate speech, for example, but they do have limitations on speech. So the famous case is Brandenburg versus Ohio, which sets the standard at calls for imminent lawless action. So they sort of have that incitement clause. But generally, the law protects speech. But you have threats against free speech in America all the time. You see it on campuses all the time. One of the things that I do is I run a philosophy discussion show, and one of my guests has been banned from his campus for 3 years based on what he said on my show. So you still have this on a regular basis, and I think the culture war in America shows you that there are many people who don't believe in free speech, and there are thankfully many people who do. And I will say it's not a value that is being shared as widely as it should be, but thankfully there are some people who really do champion it. Organizations like FIRE, for example, have done a very good job of fighting for free speech. Greg Lukianoff, who runs that organization, has said that he has been critical of those on the left and the right when they silence speech, and so is hated by everybody, and he knows that he's doing a good job on that basis.
Anything to add, David? Benji.
Hi, I'm Benji from the Middle East Africa Research Institute. I was just thinking during the talk, like, what is the most dangerous thing you could say in South Africa? And it occurred to me that maybe that would be, I would like to run as a local councillor in a small town in KZN, because that could actually result in death. And I'm just interested in your sense about free speech versus political violence.
Mark.
You're right. We have increasing levels of political violence, and it is a worry. And some of the people that we are seeing murdered for their speech are whistleblowers. So people who are sort of speaking out and saying there's a problem here with corruption. There is a sense in which the expression of political ideas is largely not vilified by the law, at least. Some people might be very upset about it, that the opportunity to express certain views on mainstream channels is hard, but you've got this proliferation of these other spaces to do it. As the mainstream press has sort of not covered itself in glory over the last couple of years, not just in South Africa but abroad, you've had this proliferation of YouTube channels popping up and people having discussions with a whole range of different political positions. I think that's good. But you have lawyers being assassinated, people doing insolvency work, other whistleblowers, so that is a worry. And it is important that people feel that they can speak out, especially when it comes to things like corruption, without the worry of being assassinated. So you need those robust protections in place.
Yeah, I would also add to that and say that is what I alluded to earlier, that the political class, and my focus really will be there on them, is they are finding ways to suppress free speech outside the law. And that is, the murder aspect is very worrying, given the collapse of the criminal justice system. We don't want to get to a situation where politicians say, why have we been bothering with hate speech law and all these things? We can just have them killed. We can pay someone 10,000 rand to kill our biggest opponents, and who's gonna stop us? SAPS? No, of course not. We must, under no circumstances, get to such a situation where that is normalized. So that's certainly something that liberals and libertarians and people who care about free speech have to kind of widen their horizons to see the threat coming in that very, very backhanded way as well. Any other questions? Louis? Oh, sorry. Yes, you, ma'am.
I've got the mic.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Pumi, and I'm from South Africa's Promise. So it's a bit of an extension of Benji's question, because it's easy to police people getting killed. It's easy to police policy. But something that is much bigger, that is actually growing in South Africa and worldwide, is a social construct around hounding people out of society if you do not like what they say. So cancel culture. Is there a thought, perhaps from the union, on how that component of curtailing people's free speech is being thought of, and how you work towards combating that?
Martin has some interesting ideas about cancel culture, which is actually part of free speech.
Yeah, no, my answer is not going to please you at all, and I think it's not going to please anyone else here, but I think that Western society, and maybe less Western society and more other civilizations, developed this idea of social ostracism, and that is, in fact, the better way to go about, let's say, discouraging people from saying certain things that we don't like. We have the West, certainly in the last century, has experimented with using the kind of cudgel of law and murder and all these things against things that they don't like. Whereas there is going to have to be a valve. I know free speech absolutists certainly say that, well, we should just all be tolerant of all sorts of speech. There should be, if someone wants to open a brothel next to my child's school, that's okay, we must be tolerant. That's not reality. That's simply not reality. People are not going to like others expressing themselves in certain ways, and that is itself freedom of expression, as David says. You are allowed to shut yourself off from certain things. And if you're in a company or in a university, a private university, then you should get to exercise that freedom of association. But I do think everything has excesses. And what we see in cancel culture today is that the baby has been thrown out with the bathwater. And it's become completely unhinged. And more problematically than that is that the current wave of cancel culture that we see around the world is not what I'm talking about. It's not a community of people saying, we're going to use our power to ostracize and we're going to stop there. It's always a lead up to, we're going to get the state to use violence against you. In Canada, for example, we have judges, I think in Spain as well, we have judges actively using court orders, contempt of court orders against people who refuse to call their daughters he's or their sons she's after the judge ordered them to do so. So you add this long lead up of, let's say, woke activism saying, well, you're going to get canceled, but it's actually now leading to people spending time in prison around this stuff. So we need to be careful and distinguish between ostracism, which I think is a valid thing for a society to do, and using that as a pretext just to get to a legislative cudgel against free speech anyway. David and Mark.
Just to add to that, so John Stuart Mill sort of cautioned against using the law to shut down speech and had very narrow limitations for speech, but also said we should be worried about the tyranny of the majority. And so Martin is right to point out that using speech to denounce speech is going to be itself protected speech. But there's a point at which it goes beyond that, and so I think about people being hounded out of their professions and shut out of life entirely, often for very minor slights, that's a very bad thing. And so I think there's a lot to be said for a culture of speech and a culture of tolerance, where you accept that you will live in a society where people will say things you disagree with, and that's okay. They don't have to be, stripped of everything that they own because of that. So I think the example that David gave about the Kiffness at the concert, ultimately, Kirsten Marsh Gardens did the right thing, which they said, we're not going to cancel this world-famous musician. He's going to be able to sing. And the protesters are going to be able to protest outside. They're not going to be able to disrupt the show. They're not going to be able to harass people, but they can stand outside and they can express their positions. And that seems to be the right way to do it. So if you draw the line in the correct direction, it's important.
Yeah, and increasingly, it's not only private citizens who engage in cancelling, but states themselves. And you mentioned the example of Canada. We've recently put out some research and made a submission around cryptocurrencies, and there's a growing wave of central bank digital currencies that are being promoted by central banks around the world. And one of the fears with these is that this will be used as a mechanism for social control. That if you say something that's politically incorrect or you threaten authority in some way, then no, suddenly we're going to control how you access your money. This is not some kind of Orwellian dystopia. We've seen this already in communist China with social credit scores and so on. So these are really real threats. And Canada, yeah, the truckers' strike against the COVID vaccine mandates, which were preventing the truckers from crossing the border without being vaccinated. They needed to show their certificate. When the truckers engaged in legitimate acts of civil disobedience, and their crowdfunding platforms were frozen, all of their funds were seized, even their Bitcoin wallets, all their exchanges, their accounts and exchanges. And this was all done under the guise of anti-terrorism legislation. And there is a nexus between the threats to free speech and some of these other infringements on your rights. And, you know, Martin used that term reality. If you cannot speak truthfully, you cannot actually reflect reality. That's kind of an epistemological question. This is like turning into an episode of Brain in a Vat, Mark's podcast on philosophy. And so is it any wonder that you get, like, say, the emergence of a two-tiered policing system in the UK, which I think there's very credible evidence for, when you're actually treating speech in a duplicitous way, in a double standard kind of fashion. You know, so this is actually really existential. It's really the water that we swim in as a free society.
No, 100%. Louis, I know you had a question. And then after Louis, we're going to take one more question, and then we'll close off.
Maybe, yeah, Chris.
Louis Bosso from AfriForum. So at AfriForum and Solidarity, we've often found lies being spread about organizations, our organizations in the media, and almost as frequently we've lodged complaints at the Press Council. And with moderate success, we have gotten media outlets to retract and apologize statements they've made about AfriForum. And I was interested in your principled stance regarding the press ombud and such societies, and also perhaps some practical tips for an organization seeking to respect free speech on the one hand, but also prevent falsehoods being spread about us.
I think one advantage we have is that it's a voluntary setup. So the Press Council allows people to become members or not become members. It's not run by the state. They've come up with the code, and the idea is that if you read papers that have subscribed to that code, you can expect some level of quality. So, you know, I shouldn't get sick from eating this food because it's got some sort of stamp of approval. And so they have certain things that they're bound by, one of which is, you know, not lying about the people that they cover. So I think it's perfectly permissible for you to say, you've said something false, and we should have an ability to adjudicate this, and then set the record straight. They have consented to that, and so, you know, I think that's fair. There are other press organizations like IOL, for example, who were booted from the Press Council, and so aren't held to the same standards. And I imagine when people read things in IOL, they know they're eating Kentucky Fried Chicken that's been sitting in a sewer for a while, and they don't take it as seriously.
I mean, the market mechanism also acts as a check and a balance, right? Like, if you're publishing something that says, "Oh, Hillary Clinton is a lizard person" or something, then maybe people are going to stop believing you after a while.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's the correct forum. It's a voluntary platform that essentially, when it finds against you, it basically tells the country, listen, these people are liars. Take them less seriously, rather than the model that most African countries have opted for, and that is that the government will come and close you down, because that is always going to be exercised in the best interest of the political elite. Now, the problem, of course, is enforcement. I mean, how many times are they going to say that AfriForum and Solidarity are spreading the myth of white genocide? Every day, all day, 365 days a year, and nothing happens, even though the Press Council consistently fights against them. You can't force them to stop, but I think, and thank God, the mainstream media has completely lost its credibility, and we're all better off for that.
But yeah, unfortunately, that's one of the side effects of free speech, right?
Exactly.
Like Winston Churchill said, a lie can travel around the world in the time that it takes the truth to put its trousers on. So
Yeah.
that's just one of those features.
But reality always wins in the end, so it takes solace in that. You, sir? Chris? Yeah.
Hi, Chris Collier. I heard on the radio today that the IEC is launching a campaign ahead of the local elections at the end of the year. It's called Real 411. I think 411 is to do with the date, whatever. And it's basically to target it's a campaign against misinformation on social media, online. I just wondered what your thoughts on, to what extent that might be overreach from the IEC. How much do you think it should be their role to be the police on the issue of misinformation online, or perhaps you might see it as perfectly aligned with their role? So I just thought what your thoughts might be on that.
I suppose there's always the worry when someone sets themselves up as the arbiter of truth. For a while, there were a number of these fact-checking agencies that set themselves up and said, this is misinformation, this is a lie, and often they were debunked themselves later. You saw a lot of that happen during the pandemic. You had, heavy-handed regulation by the American government as well. So as much as they have a constitution that protects free speech, it's now pretty open knowledge that they pressured social media companies to restrict some speech. I suppose one way to do it is the community notes thing that Twitter does. So you can have people kind of using speech to say, hey, here's what this leaves out, or here's why this is wrong, let the market decide. The worry, I suppose, with the IEC, by the way, it's not called the IEC anymore. I don't know if any of you realize this, but it's not the Independent Electoral Commission. It's just the Electoral Commission.
The Dependent Electoral Commission.
And so there's a worry. I ran some litigation to ensure that we had municipal elections during COVID. The Electoral Commission had decided that it wouldn't be free and fair to have them, and so they approached the Constitutional Court. And I argued that it's pretty important to have regular elections, given that it's enshrined in our Constitution, and the Constitutional Court agreed. But one of the reasons that they gave was they said, if we have these elections, a lot of political parties haven't registered their candidates, and there won't be time for them to register. And in particular, the ANC were in a situation where they hadn't registered a lot of candidates, and they would have auto-lost a lot of places. Afterwards, when the Constitutional Court said you have to run the election, they decided to extend the period for registrations. And so there's an argument that they didn't act very independently and that they sort of picked a side. And so I'd be wary about an organization like that telling you what counts as misinformation and what doesn't. I would rather it be done, by the public.
Yeah, I mean, if they adopt a community notes approach and just say, listen, this is the election date. Someone says it's in January. No, it is in November. I mean, that's pretty innocuous. But we must always be very vigilant about backhanded ways of the state trying to establish a precedent for where it itself can become a fact checker. I think we've seen some of these small fly-by-night political parties put forward disinformation bills and so on in Parliament, and luckily this hasn't gone anywhere. But the state is always looking for a way to ride off the wave of fighting mis and disinformation. We must really put our foot down on that.
The question is, who decides?
Exactly. Yeah, and look, there is a lot of disinformation out there. Welcome to reality. That's just how it is. We're going to have to fight bad speech with better speech, fight bad information with better information, and accept that a lot of people around us are going to fall for misinformation. It's tough. It's how it works. I'm going to go for one more question, Sebastian, and yes, sorry, but we're going to still mingle afterwards, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, well, from the cases that you know, whether they made the headlines or not, which ones were, to each of the panelists, the most objectionable ones that made you really feel like the time is now to relaunch this union?
I was very concerned about the University of Cape Town's actions introducing this academic boycott. I think it's an unconscionable limitation on academic freedom, which is specifically enshrined in our Constitution. When you tell academics that they are not free to collaborate with people of other countries, and you only single out one country in the world, being Israel, that strikes me as a huge limitation. The academy, at least traditionally, has been a space where you're meant to have a free exchange of ideas. It's the ivory tower where you can sort of explore a whole range of things that the rest of us might not consider, and it sort of trickles down. And the academy has become a place where people are enormously afraid to speak their minds. One of the things that I would do on Brain Vat, after recording with a guest, I would say, I've stopped recording. Can we have a discussion about what things are like on your campus? And I interview people from all around the world. And regardless of whether they were left or right or what their political position was, they almost all said it's absolutely dreadful. We are so worried that we're going to be cancelled for saying something, that we might upset some student or some administrator. So I commend Adam Mendelsohn for taking the university to court, and I await the outcome.
So yeah, let me add mine, and then David will finish with you. So I think for me, and I've been, since the hate speech bill came about, I've been very worried. But I think my, let's say something broke inside my my being when the accusation of high treason was leveled against Solidarity and AfriForum. And when I first heard it, coming from small party MPs in Parliament, I thought, well, sure, they're making noise and it's not going to go anywhere. And then the Hawks came in, they said they're going to investigate. And I think the NPA came in and said they're taking it very seriously. And then I realized that this government is quickly losing its sense of restraint, let's say. And this is during the GNU era, ladies and gentlemen. This is not the ANC absolute control era. This is the GNU 40% ANC era when they decided to go after a civil society organization for high treason. The only crime in this country that still conceptually carries the death penalty, right? Just because they spoke truth in the United States. So that to me really was the moment of reckoning, realizing that there is something very problematic happening here. David.
So Mr. Taylor and Mr. Scott, who I mentioned in my speech, they were intimidated and had their concerts threatened to be cancelled. But Mr. Nene, who I also mentioned in my speech, is currently languishing in jail for the act of superimposing an image of a politician onto some lewd pornography. Not something I would recommend anybody doing, but that to me just strikes me as a grave injustice, that here you have a man in the prime of his life sitting in jail just for a joke. That seems to me a miscarriage of justice, and is really the kind of thing that we should be, as a decent, freedom-loving society, we should be opposing.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what the Free Speech Union of South Africa will be doing. All right, everyone, please join me in thanking especially David and Mark for their insights here tonight. Okay, that's it, folks. Thank you for joining us again. If you are not already a financial supporter of the Free Market Foundation, I'm going to use this opportunity to shame you and to please ask you to please consider helping us in our fight, not only for free expression, but for the whole host of classical freedoms that we need to hold dear in South Africa. Because without your contributions, none of this would be possible. And we will go the way of Nigeria, of the Gambia, of Cote d'Ivoire, of Kenya. Let's not go there. Let's support civil society organizations.
And New Zealand and Australia and the United Kingdom.
Yes. I'm going to have to start realizing that the West is not the West anymore. Yes. Yes. Yeah, we have one. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We will still be around for a short while. I think there is still some light refreshments out there. And when you leave tonight, please drive safe, stay warm. And hopefully we will not wait as long as we did before having another evening event. So we hope to see you all soon again.
Please visit our website, freespeech.org.
freespeech.org.
Okay.